All right, good morning. Lots of baby sounds today. If you are a mom or a dad, no need to be anxious. That is a sweet sound. It's one that we celebrate here and welcome. It's good to be back with you today. I appreciate Gary and Carlton preaching last week and letting me be a dad and spend time in Dallas with the LTC group. That was really great. I too just want to echo how proud we are of you kids and teens. Y'all did a tremendous job, and coaches, parents, everybody investing in that. Very grateful for it. Many of us ran into William and Amy Udi and Jared Udi as well, and that was a delight to see them. And William sent me back a message for the church here. He said, "Have I told you lately that I love you?" We love William. I love William. We're going to start a new series of messages today on the book of Daniel. It is a hopeful book. It is a book rich with insight for living faithful, fruitful lives in exile, which is just a way of saying any situation or environment that doesn't seem conducive for that kind of living. It's really hard to be a Christian today. It's never been easy to be a Christian, but it's certainly not easy today. It's hard to be a Christian. If you're going to follow Jesus today, you are going against the flow of culture. Last summer, we went fishing and camping in Colorado, and we were beside a river. It's got some boulders situated all across it, and I've crossed it many times before. It's kind of fun. This last year, it was running a little bit stronger than normal, and I set out to cross it like I've done before, and one little slip, and I discovered the power of that river. Now, I'm going to tell you, I didn't go for a ride, but I almost went for a ride. And I'm grateful that there's not a picture or a video of it, because it was not impressive. But it makes a picture, if you could imagine it, of maybe something like what it feels like to be a disciple of Jesus today. The momentum is not with us. It's against us. And it is a powerful current, this culture around us. The world is changing fast. And sometimes as people of faith, we feel like our faith and all of our values, all the things we hold dear are being swept away in that culture, that we feel like maybe we're about to be totally swamped by it. This book, Daniel, steadies our thinking in that environment. There's a steadiness that comes from sitting in this book. It gives wise direction, very relevant wise direction, a lot of assurance, and really a vision for a thriving life of Christian discipleship for our own time. So the story is set in Babylon. We're going to start in Daniel chapter 1 today, roughly 2,500 years ago. The Greek historian Herodotus said that this city, Babylon, surpassed in splendor any city in the known world. It was a place of progress and high culture. It was the superpower of the day militarily, and it was also the dominant cultural influence of the time. But for God's people, for the Jewish people, it was exile. So that's the story that we're looking at, Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Now, just stop, make a couple of observations real quick. Number one, this is not just a story, it is history. It's really important to remember as we're looking at these stories. The first half of the book of Daniel is stories. The second half is visions. I think we're more familiar with the first half. We love stories. They have great power. They capture our imagination. But the visions are important too. And Lord willing, we're going to look at both halves of this book, the stories and the visions. But it's important when we remember these stories, we're not just talking about entertaining stories. We're talking about dateable history, real on-the-ground history. And that's what these opening verses do. They root it in dateable history. We're going back to 605 BC. And it is a dark day in history. Jerusalem is under siege. This is the capital city of Judah. This is the city and location of the temple. It is the heart of the nation, politically and religiously. And what we're visualizing here at the beginning is the king of God's people is taken into the hand of the enemy's king. And the holy objects from God's temple is brought into the house of the enemy's God. It is a dark day in history, and it's only the beginning. The downfall of Jerusalem happens in 3 stages. This is the first of 3 stages over a series of years. It's also important, it comes out in these verses, that God is sovereign over all history. On one level, this is the historical account of Nebuchadnezzar conquering Judah. But behind the scenes, we're giving a picture. Behind the scenes, we see that the Lord gave the king of Judah into his hand. Did you notice that in verse 2? Nebuchadnezzar is taking, but it says here, the Lord gave the king of Judah into his hand. So we're getting a behind-the-scene picture of the sovereign God working in history. There's more going on than what you see with your eyes and what's recorded in history books. Now you might say, well, why would he do that? Why would God hand his own people over to the enemy? Well, you've got to go back to Deuteronomy 28. And God has said when he let the people go into the promised land, he says, if you're disobedient, if you rebel, you will be exiled. So Deuteronomy 28, 49 through 50 says this, the Lord will bring a nation against you. This is if you disobey and rebel. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, swooping down like the eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand, a hard-faced nation who shall not respect the old or show mercy to the young. So it's not just one nation conquering another one. It is an act of judgment by God, the sovereign over all history. He is acting in a way, bringing judgment on his people for their disobedience and rebellion. The point being that we need to take away here is Nebuchadnezzar, who's the guy in charge of this great superpower of a city. He's not the real sovereign. God is. God's the real sovereign. And we're about to be introduced to some youths who know it. Let's meet the main characters. Daniel 1, verse 3. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, that is the chief of his court officials, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. We have a term for this today. We call it social engineering. That's what's happening here. It's a manipulative strategy. It's a hidden strategy that the king has, using a people's own, their best and brightest, against them for the king's purposes. So we see here, you might say, well, it's education is what this looks like, but it's education with a political agenda. Now, we're going to take Judah's future, we might call them influencers, and we're going to make them influencers for Babylon. So let's take those potential influencers, youths of nobility, the good-looking ones, the smart, the talented kids. They were probably in their teens. Think about that, you guys that are in your teens, probably in their teens, ripped away from their parents, from their friends, from their community, the only world they have known they've been ripped away from, and now they are thoroughly immersed in Babylonia. They're getting a total revamp of their worldview. They're getting re-educated in everything Babylon, including religious indoctrination. They're being trained to be influencers for Babylon, for the enemy. They're being groomed for government administrative roles. We're going to see that more as we go on. They're being groomed to serve the political agenda of the empire. And that would further subdue their own people. So it's social engineering, behind-the-scenes strategy. Look at verse 5. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. So this is further social engineering. It goes beyond education. They're going to be enculturated. The idea is we're going to turn these Hebrew deportees into Babylonian officials. They're going to become thoroughly Babylon. And so if you're going to be a Babylonian official, you're going to have to eat like one. So they are introduced to the king's food, the best food. And on one level, it is about nutrition. They want to see these best and brightest grow more and more that way. They are to appear to be the very best of the land. But it isn't just nutrition. It's assimilation into Babylonian culture, royal culture. They are going to develop a taste for the superiority of Babylon. These youths have been ripped away from everything they've known, and now they're getting introduced to the good life. This is where it's at. This is where it's happening. This is where the power, this is where the influence is. This is goodness. This is where you want to be. They're being enculturated. Part of that is they're going to have their names changed. Their Hebrew names were replaced with Babylonian names. They need a name that fits in the culture that they're in. The Babylonians are accustomed to. But there's also religious indoctrination in it. If you look at the meaning of these names, you'll see that each Hebrew name refers to the God of Israel. And each Babylonian name that they're given refers to the Babylonian gods. So Daniel and his friends, they come in named with things that teach about God. They're named things like, God is my judge. The Lord shows grace. Who is like God? The Lord helps. The names that they're given are things like, may Marduk protect his life, servant of Nabu. Their very names are shifting to say, you no longer serve that God. You serve other gods. You serve the Babylonian gods, and everything about you is going to be Babylonian now. It is cultural assimilation, religious indoctrination. It is a total revamp of their Hebrew worldview. It's an exploitation of human psychology for the ideals of Babylon. Now I want to just stop and take it to our world for a minute. Because as you're hearing that, you might think, in some ways, there's some parallels to our own. You sure don't need me to tell you that the Christian worldview today, with all of our beliefs and values, our message, our practice, it's being assailed in the public arena. It is not welcome. And there is increasing hostility toward the Christian faith and message. And it happens in our public schools. Those of you who are in the public schools, so appreciate you. You're doing good work. Talking about generally speaking in the public schools. We do see that Christian worldview is being assailed in our universities, in legislation that's being passed in our country, in social media. It's happening. We're not blind to it. We see the scheming that's going on, the strategy involved. We even use terms like social engineering that's happening, media in general, and all of these ways that are they're all over our world. The Christian worldview is being assailed. We talk about indoctrination sometimes. I think there is some of that happening, some even religious indoctrination that's happening. There is all kinds of pressure to conform to modern ideals, to reject anything traditional, anything tied to Christianity. And we see changing language. There are certain things you can't say anything anymore. There are certain words you got to take out of your vocabulary. You don't talk about God as my judge or the Lord shows favor. You don't talk about those things. We got to change our language to conform to the modern ideals of our culture. I really appreciate the insight of John Lennox. He's a professor of mathematics and Christian apologist. Probably going to be hearing a little bit more about him in this series. But he said the wave of relativism now swamping Western thinking has increased the pressure to drop certain words from our languages and replace them with others that drive forward the secularist agenda of deconstructing the very nature of human beings and the society we live in. There's a lot there, a lot of truth to that. We sense that pressure. We feel it in our world. He gives an idea of just a few things to help us to think about this. where some fundamental aspects, words that are tied to the Christian worldview are words like truth, faith, conscience, sin, chastity, authority, husband, wife. You can keep going. These are words that we can't say anymore. They're words that we are under pressure to get rid of. We can't talk like that anymore. There are other words that we're supposed to use, and these words drive an agenda. They're words like choice, non-discrimination, gender identity, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's new vocabulary. It's the vocabulary of a different empire. Now, I don't know what you feel as those are things we talk about. You don't need me to tell you. We live in this world. We see it going on all around us. How do you feel? There's a couple of things I think a couple of responses we need to be aware of. One of them is anxiety, that I think sometimes we feel like I did in that river, like I'm about to go for a ride here, a ride I don't want to go on. We think, what is happening to my world? Everything dear is being swept away, and there's some anxiety and fear, sometimes outrage with that, and there's some things to be upset about, but sometimes our outrage is tied to our fear and our anxiety. There's also, and I think we need to be really attentive to this, there's sometimes a go with the flow mentality that creeps in, that we find ourselves sort of shifting, not even recognizing what's happening. It gets kind of blurry, and we're kind of going along for the ride and don't even realize what's being stripped away. Both of those things I think we need to be attentive to, and those two things are addressed in the remainder of this story. So I want to look at the rest of chapter 1, the remainder of this story, and we're going to see two major themes that come out that are going to run all the way through the book of Daniel. Human responsibility and divine sovereignty. Held together, those two things we've got to hold on to in this changing landscape of a culture. Let's look at it. Daniel 1, verse 8. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. Okay, familiar story for most of us. A couple of things just want to point out. The first major theme that we see here, and it comes out throughout the rest of the book, is that Daniel and his friends decided to be faithful in exile. There's a decision that's made. You heard it right there in verse 8. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food. Now, this is probably mostly has to do with the dietary laws of the Mosaic law, that Daniel had grown up knowing there's certain things I'm supposed to eat, certain things I'm not supposed to eat, and that's tied to my faith and the way that I live out faithfulness to the Lord. It could have been he was concerned about meat with blood in it, or maybe food that had been sacrificed to idols. There's a lot of debate about what's going on in here. But the key thing is that Daniel understood that when it comes to eating, this is not just nutrition. This is not just what I need to live. It was an expression of faith. And the Hebrew faith had always made food one of those designators that this separates me out from the nations. In other words, the way that I eat is supposed to make me set apart from all of the nations. It's part of the expression of his faith. To eat the king's food would have been moral and spiritual compromise for Daniel. So he decided, he resolved to be uncompromised even under pressure. It would have been much easier And maybe we might not have even thought anything about it. This is what I've been given to eat. I've got to eat to live. But Daniel says, no, I'm not going to bend. I'm not going to compromise. I'm going to be resolved. I'm going to be determined not to be defiled. So he acted on it. He asked. He asked first the big guy in charge, and the big guy in charge was kind of wishy-washy on it. Like, well, if you don't end up looking good, it's going to be me that gets in trouble. And that doesn't stop Daniel. I mean, it might have been one of those things that he might say, well, I asked, I tried. He tries again. He goes to somebody else. He goes to the steward that had been assigned over him and his friends directly and asked him. And that's where he gets a little bit of ground. So he resolves and he acts on it. And I love also that he signed his friends up for it. Did you notice that in there? He's like, test your servants. Daniel resolves, and then he says, test your servants. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. You teenagers, I really, this is pretty inspiring for you to see somebody that's about your age under a great deal of pressure saying, not only am I going to be resolved to live the way God wants me to, but I'm going to be faithful in my sphere of influence. Wherever I have influence, I'm going to influence for good. I'm going to bring some people along with me in serving the Lord. And the other thing is, we all need friends like that. We all need friends who will sign us up for godly living, right? No matter how old you are, you need people alongside of you who are going to bring you more into the will of God, who are going to be dragging you along and saying, this is who we are, this is how we live. We don't do it alone. We need friends like this. Lots of rich things in this text. Question that I think we need to ask ourselves. Am I going with the flow in ways that are compromising the moral ideals that God has for me? Are there some ways where I'm just sort of drifting with everybody around me, that I'm conforming to the pressure in ways that compromise what God has called me to? In school, there's a lot of pressure to be a certain way. Are you going with the flow of the pressure of peers and the way society is going? In the workplace, I think we feel this all the time, that there's a way that we feel like, everybody talks this way, this is the culture here, this is the kinds of things we might say, whether they're inappropriate or not, or the things we might do, whether they're ethical or not. Who will we be when the flow is going in an unethical, inappropriate, unloving, unchristlike way? Who will we be? I think it makes us ask that. And we look at Daniel and we learn from this. This is what it takes. If we're gonna walk forward as disciples of Jesus in this culture that we're in, we've got to decide to be faithful in exile. It's going to take more than that, but not less than that. We have to decide, I'm going to not be defiled. I'm going to be one who strives to please God, even with what I put in my mouth, what I take in my ears, what I take in my eyes. I'm going to be resolved to be faithful in exile. No matter what's happening around me, no matter how strong the cultural current is, I'm going to decide to be faithful. This image of exile and Babylon, it's a metaphor that we see throughout the Bible. A metaphor. It's not originally a metaphor, but it's used in the New Testament in a metaphor type way for being in a culture that is decidedly not Christian. So Peter will use this language, 1 Peter 2, 11 through 12. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles. In other words, you live in a time in which it's hard to be Christian. So I urge you to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Think about what it is that's waging war against you and decide, I'm going to abstain from that. I'm not going to defile myself in these things that are actually working to wage war on me in a way that Babylon never can. Live such good lives among the pagans, among those that don't have regard for God. Live such good lives that though they accuse you of doing wrong, which is happening today, that being a Christian gets the accusation of actually being in the wrong and doing evil. Though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that He visits us. Human responsibility. Decide to be faithful. But the text doesn't leave us there. Okay, we've also got to see divine sovereignty. Daniel has decided not to be compromised. He makes a bold request. What will happen? Let's look at verse 14. So he, that is the steward, listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, he was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh. That just means healthier. Okay? They were fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And at the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. So this is the second theme that comes out. The sovereign God made these 4 youths fruitful in exile. When we read Hebrew narrative, we always pay attention to repeated words, things that are repeated in the story. And there is repetition in here of God giving. We saw it at the very first, that God gave Judah to Babylon. It was an act of judgment. Then we see it in this story where God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And then it says that he gave the 4 youths learning, skill, wisdom, and understanding. Therefore, because of what God gave to them, they stood before the king 10 times better than all the others. What we're seeing is behind the scene. What is God doing? These 4 youths, they have resolved to be faithful in exile. And then God, behind the scenes, he gives, according to his own sovereignty, he gives what they need to be fruitful in exile. Man, there's so much about this that I love. I love that we see God and his sovereignty working on a national level. He's working with nations, bringing judgment in massive ways. But then in his sovereignty, he's working with 4 teenagers in Babylon, attending to what they need. Is that not encouraging? God working on a national, global level, and God working on an intimate, personal level. I just want you to think for a minute about whatever situation you're in right now. I think all of us are in a difficulty of some kind. Whatever your difficult situation is, sometimes we might have the sense that God has more important things to do than deal with whatever is my situation. It's one of the things I love about this story is it's saying that the same God that's attentive to nations is attentive to 4 teenagers in their situation, and he's helping them in it. You can believe that the God who is the sovereign over all history is not just concerned with what's happening on a global and national level, but is concerned with what's happening in your life. And he's able to give you what you need to thrive as a disciple of Jesus in the situation that you are in. He can give that. He's willing to give that. That's what he does. He works with us on a personal level to make us thrive in exile. I think it's also encouraging, too, when we think about this changing culture around us and this river that feels like it's going to swamp everything that Christians hold dear. And as we think as parents and grandparents about the world that our kids are growing up in, it gets kind of scary sometimes. Think, what kind of world are they living in? Don't discount what God can do in exile. Don't forget about the God who produces Daniel-like character, who works with unlikely, faithful disciples in a culture that's going a very different direction and does something profound with them. Don't discount what God can do. God can make us thrive in exile. I believe very much if the Lord doesn't return before these guys are in their 80s, that they are going to be men and women in their 80s who are full of the fruit of the Spirit and who are following Jesus in the time that they live in. I believe we've got a God who still produces the fruit of the Spirit no matter what's happening in culture around us. Yeah, things are changing. Yeah, there's a lot of scariness happening, but look who's with us. The sovereign God of all history, who's attentive to individuals, to persons, to youths. I love verse 21. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. It's easy to overlook that. Do you hear what that's saying? That's saying 66 years later, he's still there. When Babylon was relegated to the dustbin of history. When Babylon's done, Daniel is still serving. Daniel outlasted his conquerors. He outlasted the empire. And what we're going to see of him and his friends is they don't just survive it. They don't just outlast. They actually thrive in that environment. They do so well. Tremendous integrity that we're going to see in these youths as they grow. And influence that we're still talking about 2,500 years later. That's what God can do in exile. So times change, cultures change, not always for the better. But Jesus does not change. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Hebrews 13:8. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. Let's keep our eyes on that reality. Let's keep our eyes on that kingdom. In some sense, it's behind the scenes. It's quiet. It's not as loud as the headlines. It's not as loud as the breaking news and the political rallies and everybody talking about the next election. It's not as loud as those things. But it's real and it's eternal. It is ever present. We are servants of that kingdom, and we trust that king. This morning, if you are not a servant of that king, and you are not part of that kingdom, if you've not put your faith in Jesus who gave himself for you, today would be a great day to respond, come and turn from your sins, be baptized into Christ. And if you've got something weighing on your heart and you need some companions, some friends, you're not in this alone. We will walk together, pray together. I invite you to come now while we stand and sing.